Karen told me to leave her neighborhood. It's named after my unit. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns of Osprey Ridge Estates, painting the perfectly symmetrical houses in hues of gold and amber. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it had been lifted straight from a glossy magazine spread. Every blade of grass in its place, every shrub precisely trimmed, every mailbox a uniform shade of black. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so, the kind of place where the loudest sound was the gentle whir of an automated sprinkler system. I was taking a slow stroll down one of the tree-lined streets, a sense of quiet contemplation settling over me. It had been a long journey, both physically and mentally, and this visit felt like a significant step in a new chapter. Osprey Ridge. The name had a familiar ring to it, a subtle echo from a life I had largely left behind, but one that still resonated deep within my bones. Osprey Ridge Estates was, as I would soon learn firsthand, the domain of Karen Mitchell. Karen was, to put it mildly, a force of nature within this carefully curated ecosystem. Her dedication to the Osprey Ridge Homeowners Association bylaws bordered on the fanatical. She possessed an uncanny ability to spot even the most minor infractions: a slightly overgrown hedge, a child's bicycle left carelessly on the sidewalk, a guest's car parked a mere inch over the designated line. Her weapon of choice was a smartphone, her ammunition photographic evidence, and her target anyone who dared to deviate from her meticulously enforced vision of suburban perfection. My peripheral awareness of Karen had begun even before I set foot in Osprey Ridge. The local online community forums were rife with tales of her zealous enforcement, often delivered with a heaping side of condescension. She was, in essence, the quintessential HOA Karen, a figure of both mild amusement and considerable exasperation for many residents. My connection to Osprey Ridge was unique. It wasn't where I had planned to settle down, not initially. After 2 decades of service, deployments to places most people only saw on a map, and a life lived on the edge, quiet suburban living hadn't exactly been high on my list. But life, as it often does, had a way of redirecting your path. A chance encounter with an old comrade who had found a measure of peace here, coupled with a compelling job opportunity nearby, had led me to consider making Osprey Ridge my new home. The name Osprey Ridge wasn't just a random selection by a developer. It held a specific significance, a piece of local history that most of the current residents, including, as I would soon discover, Karen Mitchell, seemed largely unaware of. Osprey Ridge was named in honor of the Osprey Unit, a special operations team I had been proud to serve with for many years. Our unit had been instrumental in a significant humanitarian mission decades ago, a mission that had directly benefited this very community during a time of crisis. The land where Osprey Ridge now stood had been part of a larger estate that had been severely impacted, and the Osprey Unit's efforts had been crucial in the recovery. The developers, as a gesture of gratitude, had named the new neighborhood in our honor. As I walked, I noticed a small, unassuming plaque near the entrance of the community, partially obscured by a flowering bush. I paused to read it, a familiar sense of quiet pride welling up within me. Osprey Ridge Estates, it read, dedicated to the men and women of the Osprey Unit for their selfless service and unwavering commitment to our community. The names of several fallen comrades were listed below. Lost in my thoughts, a shadow fell across the plaque. I looked up to see a woman standing on the sidewalk, her arms crossed, her expression a familiar blend of suspicion and disapproval. Her impeccably styled blonde hair gleamed in the sunlight, and her designer sunglasses perched on her nose surveyed me with unconcealed scrutiny. It was Karen Mitchell. "Excuse me," she declared, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "Do you live around here? I don't recognize you, and frankly, you look like you're loitering." I blinked, slightly taken aback by the directness of her approach. "Good afternoon," I replied calmly. "I'm just looking around." Karen's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "Looking around? This is a private community. We have rules here. If you don't live here or have a legitimate reason to be here, you need to leave." Her tone left no room for discussion. The audacity of her demand, on the very streets named after my unit, was almost surreal. The irony was so thick it could have been spread on a biscuit. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice even, "I assure you I have a legitimate reason to be here." Karen huffed, her gaze sweeping over my casual attire, comfortable jeans and a worn leather jacket. "You don't look like you belong in Osprey Ridge. We have standards here. And frankly, your presence is making some of us uncomfortable." The territoriality was strong with this one. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to remain calm. "My name is Alex," I said, extending a hand. "I'm considering moving into the neighborhood." Karen didn't take my hand. She simply stared at it with unconcealed suspicion. "Moving in? I haven't seen any for sale signs on this street, and even if you were, you need to respect our community guidelines while you're here. No soliciting, no unnecessary lingering." The lack of basic courtesy, coupled with her immediate assumption of my negative intent, was enlightening. "I understand," I said, retracting my hand. "I'll keep that in mind." "See that you do," Karen said, her gaze unwavering. "We have a very strong sense of community here, and we don't take kindly to outsiders who don't respect our rules. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important HOA meeting to attend." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing by the plaque, the names of my fallen comrades a silent witness to the absurd encounter. The HOA Karen of Osprey Ridge had just told a potential resident, with a direct connection to the very namesake of her precious community, to leave. The conflict had begun, and the irony was just beginning to unfold. Despite my less than welcoming introduction to Osprey Ridge, courtesy of Karen Mitchell, I proceeded with my plans to explore the possibility of moving into the community. The quiet charm of the neighborhood, the mature trees lining the streets, and the sense of established tranquility appealed to the part of me that longed for a peaceful respite after years of less tranquil environments. Over the next few days, I visited several properties that were on the market, each one meticulously maintained and reflecting the pride of ownership that seemed to permeate Osprey Ridge. My interactions with other residents were generally pleasant, a stark contrast to my encounter with Karen. Most were friendly and welcoming, eager to share their experiences of living in the community. Several even commented on the significance of the neighborhood's name, mentioning the Osprey unit's heroic actions decades ago, though none seemed to know any specific details about the unit itself or its members. However, my paths continued to cross with Karen Mitchell, and each encounter served to underscore her unwavering commitment to her self-appointed role as the neighborhood's gatekeeper. One afternoon, while I was admiring the landscaping of a particularly attractive property, Karen approached me, her expression a familiar blend of suspicion and disapproval. "You're still here," she stated, her tone accusatory. "I thought I made it clear that we don't appreciate loitering in Osprey Ridge." "I'm looking at a house for sale, ma'am," I replied calmly, gesturing towards the for sale sign in the yard. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Which one? I haven't seen you at any of the open houses." "It's a private showing," I explained, choosing not to elaborate further. Karen's suspicion seemed to deepen. "Private showing? By whom?" "I know all the realtors who operate in this area, and I haven't seen your car around." Her relentless questioning was becoming tiresome. "Ma'am," I said, trying to maintain my composure, "I assure you I have every right to be here. I am a prospective buyer." Karen huffed. "Well, see that you conduct your business and leave. We don't need any undesirable elements moving into Osprey Ridge." Her thinly veiled judgment hung in the air. Another day, while I was chatting with a friendly elderly resident named Mr. Henderson, no relation, thankfully, Karen interrupted our conversation with an air of officious authority. "Harold," she said, her tone sharp, "I need to speak with you about the placement of your new bird bath. It appears to be encroaching slightly on the community easement." Mr. Henderson, a kind and gentle man, looked flustered. "Oh, Karen, I thought it was within my property line." Karen's gaze flicked to me, a clear implication that my presence was somehow contributing to this minor infraction. "And who is this Harold? I don't believe I've seen him before." "This is Alex," Mr. Henderson explained. "He's thinking of moving into the neighborhood." Karen's demeanor shifted instantly, a forced, saccharine smile replacing her usual frown. "Oh, a prospective resident. Welcome to Osprey Ridge. We're a very close-knit community, as you can see." The sudden change in her tone was almost comical. However, as soon as Mr. Henderson turned away for a moment, Karen's smile vanished, replaced by a pointed glare directed at me. "Just remember what I said about respecting our rules," she hissed under her breath. It became clear that Karen viewed Osprey Ridge as her personal fiefdom, and anyone who didn't immediately adhere to her standards was met with suspicion and often outright hostility. Her territoriality seemed to extend to potential residents as well, as if she believed she had the right to vet and approve every newcomer. The irony of her demanding adherence to community rules while simultaneously displaying such a lack of basic courtesy and respect for others was a constant undercurrent to our interactions. This was a neighborhood named in honor of a unit built on teamwork, sacrifice, and service. Yet one of its most vocal residents seemed to embody the antithesis of those values. One evening, I attended a small, informal gathering hosted by one of the residents I had met. It was a casual affair, a chance for neighbors to socialize. I was enjoying a pleasant conversation with a couple who lived down the street when Karen approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and thinly veiled disapproval at seeing me there. "You're still here," she said, her voice just loud enough to be heard over the general chatter. "I didn't realize you had moved in already." "I haven't," I replied calmly. "I'm just visiting with some of the residents." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Visiting? For this long? Honestly, some people have no sense of boundaries." She turned to the couple I was speaking with. "Margaret, Tom, you know how important it is to maintain the integrity of our community." The implication was clear. My presence somehow threatened that integrity. Margaret, a kind woman with a gentle demeanor, looked slightly uncomfortable. "Karen, Alex is a potential buyer. He's been lovely to chat with." Karen's forced smile returned, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course, of course. Welcome to Osprey Ridge, Alex. We're just very protective of our little slice of paradise." The underlying message, however, was unmistakable. "We're watching you." The conflict was escalating, not through outright shouting matches, but through Karen's constant, subtle attempts to ostracize me and make it clear that I was not welcome in her neighborhood. Her territoriality was deeply ingrained, and her inability to see beyond her own narrow vision of who belonged in Osprey Ridge was becoming increasingly apparent. Little did she know the profound irony of her demands, made on streets bearing the name of a unit she clearly knew nothing about, a unit I was intimately connected to. The stage was set for a confrontation that would delve deeper into the very identity of Osprey Ridge Estates. Life in Osprey Ridge settled into a peculiar rhythm. I continued to view properties, my interactions with most residents remaining pleasant and uneventful. However, the shadow of Karen Mitchell loomed large. Her disapproval of my presence was palpable, a constant undercurrent of icy glares and thinly veiled pronouncements about maintaining the neighborhood's integrity. One sunny Saturday morning, the Osprey Ridge HOA organized a community picnic in the small park at the center of the estates. It was intended as a friendly gathering, a chance for residents to socialize and strengthen community bonds. I decided to attend, hoping to meet more of my potential future neighbors in a relaxed setting. The park was bustling with activity. Children chased frisbees, families laid out blankets for picnics, and the air was filled with the cheerful sounds of laughter and conversation. I found myself enjoying the low-key atmosphere, chatting with a few residents I had met previously. As I was talking with Margaret and Tom again, Karen approached, a determined look on her face. She seemed to be on a mission. "Margaret, Tom," she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency, "have you seen that individual lurking around again?" Her gaze flicked pointedly in my direction. Margaret frowned. "Karen, you know Alex is considering moving here. He's been nothing but polite." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Polite? That's what they all are at first. But we need to be careful about who we let into our community. We have standards to uphold." Tom chuckled dryly. "Karen, he's just talking to people. He's not exactly causing a ruckus." Karen's frustration seemed to escalate. "But he doesn't belong here. I've seen him looking at houses, and frankly, he doesn't fit the aesthetic of Osprey Ridge." The sheer audacity of her pronouncement, that I didn't fit the aesthetic of a neighborhood I had a deeper connection to than she could possibly imagine, was almost comical. Just then, Mr. Henderson approached our group, a small booklet in his hand. Karen, have you seen this? The Historical Society put together a little pamphlet about the neighborhood's namesake. It's quite interesting. Karen barely glanced at the booklet. Harold, I'm in the middle of something important right now. Mr. Henderson, oblivious to the underlying tension, continued enthusiastically. It talks all about the Osprey unit and their heroic efforts after well, it's why they named the neighborhood Osprey Ridge. Karen's dismissive attitude finally got under my skin. The casual disrespect for the history of this place, a history directly tied to the sacrifices of people I knew and served with, felt like a personal affront. Actually, Karen, I said, my voice calm but carrying a new weight, I know a little bit about the Osprey unit. Karen turned to me, her expression skeptical. Oh? And what would you know about some old military unit? I served with them, I replied simply, meeting her gaze directly. The effect was immediate and profound. The color drained from Karen's face, her mouth slightly agape. The smug certainty that had defined her interactions with me began to crumble. Margaret gasped softly. Tom looked surprised. Mr. Henderson, still holding his booklet, looked from Karen to me with a confused expression. You were part of the Osprey unit? Karen stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. For 20 years. A stunned silence fell over our small group. The cheerful sounds of the picnic seemed to fade into the background. Karen's carefully constructed world of who belonged and who didn't in Osprey Ridge had just collided headfirst with a reality she had been completely oblivious to. Mr. Henderson, finally understanding the significance of my statement, looked at me with newfound respect. Good heavens, you're one of them? I had no idea. This pamphlet mentions their bravery. It's quite moving. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the text. Karen, however, seemed frozen, her mind struggling to process this unexpected revelation. The outsider she had tried to eject from her neighborhood had a direct and deeply personal connection to its very identity. But you don't look like, she began, her voice trailing off, unable to articulate what exactly I was supposed to look like. Perhaps she had a preconceived image of a hero, one that didn't align with a quiet, unassuming man looking at houses. Look like what, Karen? I asked, my tone still calm but with a hint of steel. Like someone who adheres to your aesthetic? The sarcasm was subtle but clearly landed. Karen flushed, her earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of awkwardness. Just then, a local historian, Mrs. Albright, who had compiled the pamphlet Mr. Henderson was holding, approached our group. She was a kind, knowledgeable woman who had lived in Osprey Ridge for decades. Oh, Alex, I didn't realize you were here, she said warmly, recognizing me from a brief introduction earlier. I was just telling some of the newer residents about the history of our neighborhood and the brave men and women of the Osprey unit. She turned to Karen, a friendly smile on her face. Karen, have you met Alex? He's a veteran of the Osprey unit. He was telling me he's considering moving here. Mrs. Albright's casual confirmation of my identity seemed to solidify the reality of the situation for Karen. The shock on her face deepened, replaced by a dawning horror. You're the Alex? She whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. The pamphlet Mr. Henderson was holding likely contained names, and perhaps mine was among them. I nodded again, a quiet sense of grim satisfaction settling within me. The HOA Karen of Osprey Ridge had just demanded that a veteran of the unit her neighborhood was named after leave. The irony was complete. The atmosphere around us shifted dramatically. Margaret and Tom exchanged stunned glances. Mr. Henderson looked at me with open admiration. Mrs. Albright, sensing the sudden tension, looked from Karen to me with a questioning expression. Is everything all right, Karen? Mrs. Albright asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Karen's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. Her face crumpled, and a look of utter mortification washed over her. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Oh my God, I had no idea. The realization of her monumental blunder hung heavy in the air. The woman who had appointed herself the guardian of Osprey Ridge had just unknowingly insulted and tried to expel someone deeply connected to its very foundation. The cheerful sounds of the community picnic now seemed to underscore the profound irony of the situation, a stark reminder of the importance of humility and the dangers of judging others based on superficial appearances in a world where history and heroism can reside in the most unexpected of individuals. The silence that followed Karen's horrified realization was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of children playing in the park. The weight of her monumental blunder seemed to press down on her, the vibrant atmosphere of the community picnic suddenly a stark backdrop to her profound embarrassment. Margaret and Tom exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to navigate the sudden shift in the conversation. Mr. Henderson, still clutching his Historical Society pamphlet, looked at me with a mixture of awe and apology. Mrs. Albright, sensing the depth of Karen's distress and the underlying tension, placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Karen, dear, are you all right?" Mrs. Albright asked gently. Karen shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning sense of mortification. I had no idea. All this time, I just thought it was just a name." She gestured vaguely toward the street sign bearing the Osprey Ridge Estates moniker. I remained silent, allowing the weight of her realization to sink in. There was a strange mix of vindication and a weary sadness within me. The casual disrespect for the history of my unit, for the sacrifices of my comrades, had been jarring. But witnessing Karen's genuine shock and remorse offered a sliver of unexpected satisfaction. "Alex," Mr. Henderson began, his voice filled with sincere apology, "I am so sorry for Karen's behavior. She can be a bit overzealous at times. We all appreciate your service and the sacrifice of your unit." I offered a small, acknowledging nod. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. It's been a while." Karen finally found her voice, her tone subdued and filled with genuine regret. "Alex, I don't know what to say. I was so rude to you, so territorial, and to think, this whole time, this neighborhood, it's named after your unit." Tears welled in her eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry. My behavior was inexcusable." The transformation was stark. The imperious HOA Karen had seemingly vanished, replaced by a genuinely humbled and ashamed woman. The realization of her ignorance and her disrespect had clearly shaken her to her core. "It's all right, Karen," I said, though a part of me still felt the sting of her earlier dismissiveness. "It was an honest mistake. You didn't know." "But that's no excuse," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have been more welcoming, more respectful, especially to someone who was considering moving into our community." She looked down, shame etched on her face. The rest of the community picnic proceeded with a noticeably different atmosphere. Karen remained subdued, occasionally casting apologetic glances in my direction. Several other residents, having overheard parts of our exchange, approached me to express their gratitude for my service and their embarrassment at Karen's behavior. In the days that followed, Osprey Ridge seemed to undergo a subtle but significant shift. There was a newfound awareness of the neighborhood's history, a quiet appreciation for the sacrifice of the Osprey unit. Mrs. Albright's Historical Society pamphlet became a sought-after item, and conversations about the unit's heroic actions could be overheard among residents. Karen, too, underwent a transformation. Her zealous enforcement of minor HOA rules seemed to lessen. She became more approachable, more willing to engage in friendly conversation without an underlying tone of suspicion or judgment. She even approached me a few days later, offering a heartfelt apology and expressing her sincere gratitude for the Osprey unit's service. Our subsequent interactions were polite, though a certain awkwardness lingered. I accepted her apology, recognizing the genuine remorse in her voice and her actions. I did eventually decide to move into Osprey Ridge. The quiet charm of the neighborhood, the unexpected sense of connection to its history, and the genuine warmth of most of its residents outweighed the initial unpleasant encounter. And while Karen's transformation was a welcome development, my decision was ultimately based on the peacefulness and the subtle underlying sense of belonging I felt in a place named after the men and women I had served with. The irony of the HOA Karen telling a veteran to leave the very neighborhood named after his unit remained a memorable, if somewhat surreal, introduction to suburban life. But ultimately, it served as a catalyst for a deeper understanding within the community, a reminder that beneath the manicured lawns and strict bylaws, There was a shared history and a need for basic human respect, regardless of appearances or perceived status. And sometimes the most profound lessons are learned when our assumptions collide with the unexpected realities of the past.